Hello, I am Alon Burstein. I am a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, and I am here to give you the updates on the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the eve of October 18th, 2023 in the United States, the morning of October 19th, 2023 in the Middle East. So starting with the aftermath from the initial attack on October 7th, the death count in Israel continues to rise. There are still bodies of Israelis from the initial massacres that are being discovered in various different places. This is also because different civilians and children were trying to hide in different places and ended up being killed, or because bodies were actually attempted to be hijacked back into the Gaza Strip, or other different circumstances. Either way, the death toll continues to rise. There were several bodies of Israelis and a specific family that was found today in the kibbutz of Be'eri. Now going to some of the ongoing fighting. There were continued rocket and missile attacks from the Gaza Strip into a wide range of cities in Israel, primarily in the south of Israel and the center. So there were attacks today in Beersheba, Gush Dan, Tel Aviv, Ashkelon, Ashdod, all around the area surrounding Gaza. And this is significant because a lot of these attacks occurred specifically while President Joe Biden was visiting Israel. I will talk about this a little bit later, but Biden was in Israel today for a grand total of 7.5 hours. And during his time, there were several rocket attacks. Now, in the IDF attacks in the Gaza Strip, the IDF today continued its bombardments across the Gaza Strip, focusing primarily on Gaza City in the north. It is reported that the IDF managed to assassinate the head of the anti-tank brigade in Hamas's divisions of the Gaza City. In addition to that, the Palestinian Health Ministry is now reporting that there are nearly 3,500 Palestinians that have been killed. The death toll rose quite exponentially yesterday after the explosion that occurred in the hospital. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about this later. In addition, the Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting that at least 1,300 people are missing under the rubbles of the different buildings that have been bombed, among them several hundred children in the Gaza Strip. During President Joe Biden's visit, he met with the Israeli War Cabinet today, and he urged the Israeli cabinet to start thinking about the day after. What is going to happen? Israel is threatening to destroy Hamas, but it is unclear what is going to be then instead, and it is clear that the United States is quite concerned in light potentially of Israel's very hawkish right-wing government that it had leading into the war, that there might be thoughts by some elements of the government to either reoccupy Gaza permanently or set up settlements or something like that. President Joe Biden urged Israel today to consider a practical solution to what is going to be happen in Gaza, who's going to govern Gaza if and when Hamas is actually taken down, and he urged Israel to not strangle Gaza and emphasized again and again that the United States' ability to protect Israel internationally and give it legitimacy is contingent on not having a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Now, related to that, as a result of U.S. pressure, Israel today allowed minimal humanitarian aid to start flowing from Egypt. So in a deal that was brokered between Israel and Egypt, 20 trucks with food, medicine, and water are now being allowed in through the Rafah crossing from Egypt, and Israel has agreed to allow them an open humanitarian corridor to get to different parts of the Gaza Strip. Responding to different pressure within his own cabinet, Netanyahu today specifically explained again and again that this was allowed only due to the specific request from the United States, and that no humanitarian aid was going to go through Israel itself. In addition to that, and related, the foreign minister of Egypt today stated that the Rafah crossing has been damaged. However, if it is restored, not only will humanitarian aid be able to flow, but Egypt will be willing to accept and to evacuate into its territory Gazans with dual citizenship. This is significant. Until now, both Egypt and Jordan have openly said again and again that they will not take in Palestinian refugees as a result of the fighting in Gaza, or if fighting escalates towards the West Bank. This is the first time that Egypt has said, well, Gazans with dual citizenship will be able to be evacuated into Egypt. Moving on to the West Bank, in different conflicts with the IDF, 4 Palestinians were killed today throughout different towns of the West Bank. In addition to that, in Ramallah, there were thousands in a pro-Hamas rally. This was explicitly for Joe Biden's visit and because of the hospital attack that occurred yesterday. At the same time, in Hebron, there was a rare protest that was seen in which there was a joint coming together of people from Fatah and Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is significant because up until now, there has been less presence of Hamas in the West Bank. The West Bank is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, which is controlled by the PLO and Fatah, and the fact that there's now coming together of a protest of Fatah, Hamas, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad could be significant later on. Moving on to the north, there were today, as has been the last several days, or actually the last 2 weeks since the war began, continued low-level escalations with Hezbollah firing mortar fires and anti-tank missiles and shooting into IDF outposts, and IDF retaliating, everything in a very contained way, both sides seemingly signaling that they do not want to actually get into a full-blown escalation in the north, but also continuously retaliating against each other. So there was gunfire today from Hezbollah into the town of Zarit in the north of Israel, as well as into a nearby IDF outpost, and 2 anti-tank missiles were fired into the outpost. There were rockets and missiles fired into Kiryat Shmona and across the Galilee area in the north. The IDF retaliated against Hezbollah targets, including using mortar fires to fire into Lebanon. In addition, the IDF reported that it managed to attack a unit of Hezbollah that was about to shoot mortar fires into Israel, and that several people there were killed, and there were retaliations in the areas of Shuva and Hardov as well. In addition, in light of the sort of impeding escalations and everyone's anticipation that conflict may erupt, there were several developments. First, the Israeli government announced today that it has approved a plan to evacuate Israelis from a 5-kilometer radius, this is about 3.5 miles, from the north of Israel, should such an escalation occur. So all the plans are in place and they'll just have to flip a switch. In addition, the United Kingdom's Foreign Ministry today issued a warning calling on its citizens to not travel to Lebanon in light of ongoing escalations. In a side anecdote indicating the escalations and the tensions in Lebanon, the Lebanese army today announced that they are deploying around the branches of McDonald's and KFC in the country because there may be riots there and an anti-American sentiment. And continuing our reports from the north, there was a report today that there are special orders that have been issued to all military personnel in Syria to be on heightened alert to not fire into Israel. So the special orders by the Syrian army to all its battalions down south to make sure that no one accidentally becomes a hothead and fires into Israel. And this report included statements from the Syrian army that said that Assad was explicitly warned that should any firing from Syria come into Israel, Israel will retaliate with extremely harsh measures, and that is why they have special orders to be extremely careful. There are several different factions of Hezbollah and Palestinian units in southern Lebanon. The Syrian army appears to be starting to notice that this could complicate them and drag them into the war, and they're trying to avoid that. Now, some of the political developments. As I mentioned, President Joe Biden visited Israel today for 7.5 hours. From there, initially he was supposed to travel to Jordan for a joint summit with the President of Egypt, the King of Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority Chairman, Mahmoud Abbas. This was supposed to discuss the days after Gaza. However, this summit was canceled after the explosion occurred in the hospital in Gaza. So after the visit in Israel, President Biden is going to meet with the Egyptian president and possibly the King of Jordan, but there's not going to be such a summit. In addition, during his visit, he announced an unprecedented support package for Israel and also stated the United States will be transferring $100 million to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as part of just his efforts of humanitarian aid. In addition, President Biden said in relation to the strike against the hospital in the Gaza Strip that after he had received intelligence reports from the Pentagon as well as being shown in the reports from IDF, he is confirming that in fact that attack occurred as a result of a failed rocket launch of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Despite this, the UN envoy to the Middle East has said that an investigation must continue. Other political developments that occurred, the United Kingdom Prime Minister is expected to arrive tomorrow morning in Israel, and before his trip, he also stated that part of his mission is to try to keep this in a localized way, to not let this conflict spiral into an entire regional conflict. Not in relation to that, but on a similar vein, today the Foreign Minister of Lebanon met with the Foreign Ministers of Saudi Arabia and Iran, and during these meetings, he also said that he calls on the West to apply more pressure to Israel to not let this conflict escalate further and further and to keep this confined within the territory of Israel and Palestine. Those are our updates in the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.